Okay, welcome everyone. Glad to see you here today. Please join me in welcoming Linley Ali, the head of enterprise-wide technical architecture for Florida Blue. Linley?
Great. Thank you, Carol. All right, so that's a mouthful. EWTA is the short form that we use. I'm really an enterprise architect, really. I manage IT strategy and a couple other things at the organization. And recently, we started down identity management using the CA product set. I'm currently working on other projects, as well as this one. I'm working on things like big data. I'm looking at new security models, analytical tools, and so forth. But this was the project that we had. We considered it very successful, and we're continuing to deploy this product within the organization. All right, that's me. All right, here's our agenda for today. My plan is to talk for about 10 to 15 minutes and then open it up for Q&A. Because really, what we've done hopefully will be helpful to you as you proceed in the deployment of this technology. So here's what we're going to start with. We're starting with business drivers, what caused us to do what we were going to do. We're going to talk about solution selection criteria. That is, why did we choose this over something else? We're going to talk about methodology. We're going to take a look at outcomes. And of course, that's probably most important to most of you. What were the outcomes of this project? And then finally, we'll take it lessons learned. Every project has lessons learned. So hopefully you can benefit from that and won't fall into the same pitfalls that we fell into. All right, so what were the business drivers essentially for doing this project? Well, I can summarize it simply by saying this. We wanted to do three important things. We wanted to deprovision, we wanted to provision, and we want to have a proper security posture. And we think that by provisioning timely, deprovisioning in a timely manner, provides us with the appropriate security posture in terms of an organizational stance. So we wanted to do something like this, reduce higher provisioning from 1 week down to less than 1 day. Now, what is that? That sounds kind of stupid, that someone would take 1 week to provision. But as many of you know, you typically do take a long time to provision all the accesses required for an individual. Joe Smith shows up on Monday morning, and he's essentially reading manuals for about a week and a half until you finally get him all the accesses that he needs. Imagine being able to provision within the moment he arrives so that he can be a productive employee. We wanted to improve efficiencies by automating the user provisioning process. That means less manual work, less paperwork, less managers being involved. The less people you can put into a process, the less chances you have for error. We want to address an audit compliance. That's the deprovisioning piece. So let's say that a person leaves the company. We do not want that individual to still have access onto the system 3 weeks later, or as in my previous company, 1 year later. We wanted to get also to talk about user attestation and certification. Now, we used to use a product. We got rid of it, and we'll talk about that in a second. We wanted to talk about certification. Does Manager A have all these employees working for them? Do they have the appropriate accesses? And can we, from an audit perspective, keep track of that? And then finally, we have audit capabilities and managing individuals. So I can know when Joe Smith moves from position A to position B to position C. I can understand what accesses he has in those different roles as he moves through the organization without ending up having a collection of all those accesses. All right, solution criteria, COTS versus homegrown. Well, we had a heck of a homegrown solution. In fact, a couple of my colleagues here were the ones who put it together. They put that together long before I got there, and it was based on a set of programs, scripts, some manual processing, some good luck, and some hope in many cases. So it wasn't ideal. It wasn't extensible. And so you see there the second point, it really lacked the ability to add additional endpoints. As any organization grows or even expands, one type of application goes off, a new one comes in, And how do you manage those endpoints when you're doing everything by hand, so to speak, having to write homegrown, homemade pieces and components? That's pretty difficult. So that was the homegrown solution. We then decided, why not have a off-the-shelf solution? And we looked at a set of different products. We went to Gartner, did a bunch of appropriate research, and we landed on the CA product. Why CA then? Well, as I said, the Gartner reports were there. We thought they were good. From what we saw, we liked their paradigm for thinking about identity management. We think it's the appropriate one. We like the fact that they had two pieces that work together coherently, which is the Identity Minder or Identity Manager product and the Governance Manager product. They've changed the names recently, so I have to get used to that. But we have also CA SiteMinder on board, and because of that, we thought we could get unified support. We would have a coherent picture view from the product set. So there you go, a single solution, a single view of the world. Then, of course, we were also replacing the Oracle product that we have. So again, the Oracle product was not as robust as the CA product, and from a cost or total cost of ownership, the CA product was the more appropriate one for us at that point in time. Approach and methodology. What can I say? There was a lot going into this, but I think these things here just summarize the surface of what we did. It is really critical when you start this project or process like this to spend a lot of time understanding what it is you're trying to accomplish. You then need to marry that against the product and the product itself and how they accomplish that task on your behalf. So we spent a lot of time with cross-functional teams. We worked with the HR folks. HR folks are critical in this process. They provide us the inputs and the feeds, and we'll see that later on. Then we had information security, the security posture and the security stance, the accesses and controls, and all those other aspects of security were critical, so we need to involve security folks. We call them ISTO. And of course, we had the application areas, and we learned a couple of hard lessons by initially not involving the application areas, but subsequently by involving them, we were able to overcome some of the shortcomings that we had. And let me say, they're not shortcomings of the product, they really were process shortcomings on our part. So my guidance there is really to spend a lot of time understanding the complete picture, understanding the security policy as far as the applications that you're contacting are concerned, and moving that backwards up from there into the actual product. So what we did was we decided to prioritize what we were doing. This is critical. So we picked, we had multiple phases. As you can see, phase one is stated there, but we have multiple phases in this project. So this is a multi-year project for us. Given that we have more than one application where we work, we could only tackle so many at a time, especially as you're going in the first time. So what we did was we took on some what would be big users of the systems, our call center kind of folks, our CRM type applications, applications that had a lot of volatility in them. So that is a lot of people onboarding and offboarding quite regularly. So those were the type of applications that we wanted to hit. And we had 5 core applications there. From a rollout strategy perspective, and this is something that is also important, we limited this to employees first. Now, when we first started doing this, we were moving employees. We spent a lot of time bringing employees on board and off board. And as the world of IT has evolved, we are now working a lot more with contractors. So our next phase, phase 2, we'll be working on how to onboard contractors. And we'll talk about how to model IDs against roles of individuals. Not individuals per se, but roles of the actual entity that is going to be described. And then, of course, we limited this to offboarding and onboarding. Phase 2 and phase 3, we'll talk about transfers. We're going to talk about seasonal workers. We're going to talk about different types of work relationships that we have with external entities as well. So even those, we believe that all those different categories and types of users can be managed by the IMAG solution. Oh, sorry, IMAG stands for Identity Management and Access Governance. That's the acronym that we chose, Florida Blue. And of course, you see the last thing there is role certification and privileged user certification. Again, keeping the scope narrow to those specific individuals. Now, this is the best I could come up with to simplify what we've done. And what it is, it shows very simply. We receive data from our PeopleSoft, our HR feed as we call it, and it's in yellow. It is the golden source of truth for us. Then we have the CA Identity Manager product. We have the Governance Identity product. And then we have our endpoints. So conceptually, it's just that simple. Now, as my friends will attest, there's a lot of work getting all that to work in that particular shape and form, but it is worth it in the long run. And so let me talk a few things here. PeopleSoft is really important for us. All the attributes and pieces that make up and providing access to an endpoint start from the PeopleSoft side. Those attributes are critical to ensuring that we are making sure that the right access happens at provisioning, and at the same time when someone needs to be deprovisioned, the access starts off, or the de-access, or the turning off of access, happens right in the PeopleSoft event. So that makes it to us. We run PeopleSoft feeds, I think, every 2 hours. That is a number that we've chosen. You can move it to every 10 minutes if you're so inclined. You can move it to 1 week if you're so inclined. It's a parameter that we chose. The endpoints basically have a lot of differences though, and this is probably what was probably the most difficult for us, was understanding how the different endpoints and how the different set of accesses are controlled within the context of the IDM product. There was a lot for us to learn, and we'll talk about some of that, lessons learned towards the end here, but really and truly, this really is as simple as it looks, as really what it is. Those are the key and core components. Here's the outcome. So we originally talked about going from 1 week to 1 day. We're now actually down from 1 week to 2 hours. That's a 95%. I didn't work out that number, but someone want to check the math for me? Someone else did, but it's basically a massive improvement. So as I said earlier, John Smith is now able to start working first thing Monday morning. We'll get the first feed at 4 o'clock in the morning from PeopleSoft on Sunday, which is Monday morning at 4 a.m. That individual shows up to work at 9 o'clock, someone like myself. They're able to start working. They have access to the systems that they need access to. We eliminated manual effort by automating provisioning. So now we were able to take some of our key security admin people and stop them having to do ad hoc provisioning on behalf of managers who make phone calls and say, hey, listen, send nasty emails, why isn't Joe working yet, and so forth. We were able to take that, and now with an automated process, we don't get those phone calls, those nasty phone calls anymore, or those nasty emails, right? We also got rid of manual keying errors. The more times you have people involved in a process that's not automated, you have manual entry of information, you have the probability, or high probability, for a lot of errors. Right. The other thing we did was we created an enterprise birthright role. This is critical. That is, I mean, I can't state enough of how important this is. What this allows you to do is basically provide all the access required by an enterprise birth role. Now, what you can do is you can augment that enterprise birth role with other roles and accesses through the IDM product, through policies, but really, you need to start with understanding what an enterprise role is, and we did that right from the beginning, and the CA folks helped us to understand that, and that was really a true paradigm shift for us. From the identity governance perspective, we used that tool to help us mine the data that we had about accesses to understand what were those roles would be. So that's the critical part of that component and that tool. And then, of course, we eliminated the manual import of data for attestation. Again, eliminating manual processes, automating systems, really and truly is where you want to be, especially when it comes to this. It minimizes your error and your transfer errors and the probability of having either out of compliance, workers not working properly, or from a security posture, again, this is really important given the world in which we live, about having open accesses because someone has left the company and their user ID is still on the system and the access is still open. Lessons learned. And hang in there, we're almost done. Listening to me, and we'll get some questions. Having knowledgeable resources, strong, experienced focus. Okay, this wasn't us. This is the CA folks. We decided to use CA as a staff aug. They were very bright, sophisticated people. They understood what we needed to do. They worked very closely with us in making this a successful project. When you think about the scope of what we're trying to do, we're trying to relearn what we had done and undo what we had done and move to a new product. And at the same time, take advantage of the skill sets that they had to help us shift to the right place that we wanted to be. We use CA education. We went through the training. We've had some discussion with their folks. The training was helpful. It helped put us in the right direction and helped us understand how things were going to work. But with any training, you can always use more. Having resources on site. Okay, again, we brought the CA folks in with great regularity to spend a lot of time with us. It was invaluable. I cannot emphasize that enough, that their abilities to help spot problems, see things that we were doing, help us to reconfigure what we were doing and make sense of what we were doing was really critical. And that team building that happened, we spent a lot of time together. We learned a lot in the process. The CA folks really, really were helpful in helping us get to the end game. Another good thing that CA did for us, because the way the contract was situated, they helped us stay within the box, as one of the gentlemen used to like to say. There was no scope creep. So whenever something came down from the business, we'd like to include X, we'd like to include Y, which typically happens. We could say, contract says these following 5 things, this is what we're going to do for you. If you want that, it'll be done in phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. So, and then finally, what we also learned, and this was critical for us, Florida Blue actually is one of 4 pillars inside of a larger organization called GuideWell. We're going through a lot of changes, and what we realized was sometimes things that were happening inside of HR, cost center changes, renumbering of organizations, employee renumberings, a bunch of different things that typically happen at the HR level, we were not being told at the IDM level. Security folks, that is us, weren't being told about that, and we found that if they don't do the right thing and tell us and keep us in touch with what's transpiring, we can't make the right changes within the IDM system. And that goes back to my original diagram, which was the golden source of truth is the HR system. It has to be in close contact with us in the security area so that we can make the appropriate changes over time, right? We can only be as effective as they communicate to us. So I think that's something that I think that needs to be, that isn't talked about much, but one of the lessons learned. All right. I'm well over my time, what I stated, but I'm ready for some questions and answers. Anything high level and easy, I'll take. Anything difficult and technical, I have the A team here to help me and support me for that.
And we do have a mic, so if anybody would like to ask a question, I can bring that, or you can walk up and get a mic there. All righty.
This one for me or for them? I'm just kidding.
Hi, when you did your identity governance implementation, obviously you have to do the install, and then the application onboarding comes later, right? You have to have something to work with. So how do you manage your sizing for this product, where you're doing the sizing, the design, at an architecture level, the infrastructure, when you don't really understand yet the full scope of the applications that are going to be onboarded because you haven't started that discovery yet?
Well, yeah, no, I'm going to let Molly speak, but from our side, what we did was we let Molly speak. There you go.
So it's a tricky, it's catch-22, right? Typically what we try to do as part of this process is to at least estimate what are the initial systems that we are going to bring in. And we knew that we are going to bring in 5 different applications. And when we started scoping the hardware and the sizing of the system, we scoped them to scale up to another level, so maybe 10 applications. It's mainly when it comes to identity governance, number of accounts, number of entitlements, number of users that you're going to be bringing in, and what are you going to do with it, right? So that kind of a parameter gave us an option and understanding to say, we're going to start with some baseline, and we're going to implement that solution. And we gave them paths to say, okay, in this case, you're going to bring in additional components. This is how your scalability is going to look like, right? So if you want to take it offline, we are down there at the security services. We have booths over there, so we can drill down into details and help you out a bit more if you want some additional pointers on it, okay?
Any other questions? I think they flew in the helicopters. and then that helped
Yes,
size the problem.
Absolutely. I mean, sizing is always difficult, in all honesty. You have to take a best guess, but they do have some parameters from which to work with that allow you to sort of estimate where you're going to be. You do the best that you can, and if necessary, that's the good thing about IT. We call our service folks and say, "Yeah, I want a bigger box with more memory on it." All right, go ahead.
On the roles, I see you guys are importing the roles from governance minder to identity manager. So how are you defining the roles, and how do you map the role to entitlement, roles to the entitlements? Is it all done in the governance minder, or is it happening in identity manager?
All right. Larry, do you want to talk about?
I'll take that one too. So the roles were, basically we imported the data into identity governance, and then we have the HR parameter. So there were like 3 or 4 different HR attributes we used to mine the roles inside identity governance. And the entitlements, if you look at the endpoints, we had the, RACAV groups, Siebel roles, we had Oracle roles. There are other native applications also had roles. Those things were the entitlements on the endpoint, they were also imported, and we were able to group them in the analytical process and then mine them inside identity governance. And we used the outbound connector. The identity governance has an IDM connector. We exported them back into IDM through identity governance, and they were imported back into IDM. Okay, so again, we are right behind that orange stuff. We can drill down deeper into it, and I can explain.
Right. You're basically importing the information from one side, you mine the data on one side, push it to the other side, then you have a set of parameters defined by criteria that you're coming from your HR system that you already know in advance. And you fill in, you grab those parameters from the data that you mine. Yes, sorry.
Hi. You didn't say how big your company was. What's your...
We're the biggest. No, we're the biggest health insurer in the state of Florida. We have how many employees? Under 10,000, but over 8,000. Is that right? Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, close to 10,000.
How many roles have you ended up with?
How many roles do we have? Oh, Larry, you know this. 1,500 so far we've mined, and we're going to probably mine a few more.
Yeah.
It's not trivial. It's funny when you talk about number of roles, sorry for interrupting, but I always thought, hey, we got all this great stuff, this technology will come up with 3 simple roles for everybody. Well, it's not that easy. As you can see, 1,500 for now. And maintenance of those roles going forward is critical to the organization's success with a tool like this. So that's a great point. And for others out there, understand this is not a trivial task, but it's a meaningful task though. Yeah. Right, and Raj is prompting me here to tell you that those number of roles will also increase depending on the number of endpoints you have. So there is a relationship.
That wasn't my real question. My real question was, of the 5 applications, did you have any applications that had application level security? And if the answer to that is no, how are you going to handle that in your next phases?
Oh, the answer is yes.
Okay.
So Quest actually does have application. Our Quest application does have application layer rules stored inside. Is it Oracle? Okay, and Raj, do you want to speak about that? Raj works specifically with that, and so he can talk about that.
Yeah, we have applications of different types. For example, we have a claims reprocessing application that needed native security at the tuxedo level we are using.
Correct.
So what the identity manager would provide in that case is it provides the information from the HR, it translates through the IDM and through the roles, and it will tell like what exact parameters need to go in through the connector so that it can hand off that to the application level security by tuxedo, so that when the user logs in, he is able to seamlessly log in as if it was administered and created by the administrator of the tuxedo itself.
Correct.
So this eliminated a lot of the groundwork we have to do, because the manager has to call in and he has to go through the details, and the administrator has to get a service level desk ticket to audit the process and verify that with the manager and hand off with the user. We eliminated all those steps, as Linley was putting on. from a week to less than 2 hours. So we automated that solution in that way. And again, if you see the other aspect, like LDAP applications, it has security through the SiteMinder. So all we needed to do is go in and update the authentication source a level, and the SiteMinder would take care of the authentication and authorization to go into the applications.
So the answer was yes.
Okay. So
And
did I
he's not
answer
at a
that?
booth. He's not at a booth, but we'll get you his email if you need that. There's a gentleman right here who wants a question.
How do you keep track of all changes? Do you have like a monthly meeting with all your application owners, or just in our company, people change access all the time, create new roles inside the application. They don't always tell us until someone requests access. But is there a way you guys do that?
Well, the answer is, Larry, do you want to take this one now? Larry's handling actually all that sort of stuff, and he'll make it in languages easy to understand.
Yes, like we have an application that just came online. There was 4,000 users that were added. So what you have to do is you have to go to your governance minder and you have to update your roles so that they incorporate those new that new application, that new access, or existing application with new roles. So either way, you're going to go to governance minder, which is then going to feed the new privileges that are associated to a role, and you might even increase your number of roles you have because of the increased internal security for our application roles. So then you're going to push it into IDM, and then it's going to provision that access.
Back to the, yeah.
Say you got 10 new roles in the application. How do you know which IDM role it belongs to at that point? Do you talk to the developers, application developers, or business? Who makes that decision?
Do you mean like if an application, so if the application side, they add 10 more new roles inside of the application? Well, you remine every so often, right?
You have to remine.
You mind it, but I mean, how do you say, okay, a new customer service level 10, whatever, role came in, so how do you map that to the role within the IDM?
Well, you have role certification. And what role certification is that you're going to get, you have approvals as to what roles are going to have access to the new functionality that you're trying to implement.
No. Go one level back. He's talking about provisioning an user to a role, provisioning role. So you say that you have around 15,000 provisioning roles for individual department or individual users. So he's asking, how do you create a role? On what basis are you going to create a role? If a role has 15 active directory groups and then 30 rack of groups, how do you create those roles? On what basis? Do you create it on the basis of an title or a department name or?
Right.
Yes, right.
Right. So.
And the next question, what he's trying to ask is, if a user moves from one department to the other department, so we work for a healthcare insurance, and the problem what we are having is I create a role, after 15 days that guy gets promoted and he moves to a different role.
Right.
So, and 5 or 6 applications get added and those groups get added into the new provisioning role. So he just wants to know, how are you going to mitigate the...
Right, so let's talk about the first part is, we haven't, you're talking about what we call transfers. The second part of your question about transfer, one person transfer from one department to another. We haven't solved that yet. What I'm thinking of doing, and we're going to have this discussion, we've been having this discussion internally so far from transfers, is really because you have an automated system, in my personal opinion, and we're going to come and we're going to hash this out over and over again until they have finally agreed to it. But as far as I'm concerned, you have an automated system. An individual transferring is the equivalent of removing them from role A and assigning them to role B. That's just that simple. Because you have an automated system, it can happen that fast. You are basing this on an HR trigger event. You cannot be basing this based on an email that comes in from some manager at one area or some other sort of criteria like that. So for me, that's how we're going to handle transfers. Unless I'm really pushed off onto the big data project and I never get to touch this again. But that's really how it should be handled. That's the value of system automation. That's what we have computers for. The second part, and we're running out of time, is, Raj, you want to take the question about how do you mine roles to...
Like when you get the application roles requested from the application side, right? We have to basically go in a proactive mode. Currently, we are in a reactive mode where the changes happen and we are trying to retrofit and create the roles through the role mining process in the governance minder, and those roles get get defined and promoted, got pushed into the IDM and the provisioning server. But the best approach to do that is to engage with the applications upfront. If they can flow through the HR process, that would be ideal. To make that happen, the applications have to be in touch with the security organizations, saying like, these are the things that we are coming up with, and the role engineering team can take those and put that in the role engineering process and come up with the new roles, create those roles through the governance minder.
Right.
And then the HR attributes can link up to those.
Right. Let me
that
summarize.
would be the ideal one.
Let me summarize, and we can take this offline. We'll have further discussion with you. But remember this, what I said back in the beginning. We work cross-functional teams to ensure that all information flows to all the different pieces. You cannot do this alone as a security operation. This is not just simply a provisioning operation. This is not simply an application issue. This is an organizational issue, and we had to convince our leadership that that's the way it has to be done. So I think I'm out of time. Carol's looking at me funny.
Looking at you in admiration. Excellent speaker. I think that was an excellent talk. Thank you very much,
Thank you.
Linley.